I bought my parents a beautiful retirement home to thank them for everything they sacrificed for me. But only a few weeks later, I walked in and found them being treated like strangers in their own house. My sister-in-law had taken over the place like it belonged to her. So I showed up at her party, placed the house deed on the table, and watched her confident smile disappear. That was the moment everything changed. And trust me, what happened next shocked everyone. If you enjoy dramatic family stories with unexpected twists, make sure you stay until the end. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? The anger I felt wasn't normal anger. It hit me like a punch to the chest. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like I had missed a step walking downstairs. I stood frozen at the front door, staring around the house I had secretly spent 8 months renovating for my parents. As an interior designer, this wasn't just another project for me. It was personal. Every room was filled with love. I picked warm hardwood floors, bright quartz countertops, and even painted the walls the soft sage green my mother always admired in magazines but could never afford herself. 3 weeks ago, I proudly handed my parents the keys. The house was supposed to be their peaceful escape. A place where my father, David, could finally rest after decades of hard construction work, and where my mother, Martha, could sit in the sunroom reading mystery novels without worrying about rent, bills, or leaking roofs. But when I arrived carrying a bottle of champagne to celebrate their first month there, the home didn't feel peaceful at all. It felt like a crowded party venue. The living room was packed with strangers holding fancy drinks. Pink and gold balloons covered the fireplace I had restored myself. Loud laughter filled the air. And my parents. They looked like guests who didn't belong there. I spotted my mother first. Instead of relaxing in the comfortable chair I bought for her bad hip, she was squeezed into a tiny love seat in the corner, sitting quietly with her hands folded in her lap. She looked nervous, almost afraid to touch anything. Then I saw my father. He stood alone near the kitchen hallway, holding a paper plate with cold pasta salad. He wasn't even sitting down. He pressed himself against the wall so servers rushing by wouldn't bump into him. In his own home, a woman brushed past me and casually asked, "Are you with the catering staff? We need more napkins near the gift table." I could barely breathe after hearing that. Then I looked toward the center of the room and saw my sister-in-law, Vanessa. She sat proudly in a fancy wicker chair like she owned the place, smiling and laughing while guests surrounded her. Her pregnant belly rested under her hand as everyone treated her like the queen of the event. Nearby stood my brother Jason, quietly carrying appetizers and avoiding eye contact with everyone. "This house is perfect for us," Vanessa announced loudly to her friends. "We finally have the space we deserve." My hands tightened around the champagne bottle. That was the moment I realized something terrible had happened while I was away. This wasn't just about someone using the house. My parents were being pushed aside in the very home I bought to give them comfort and dignity. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash the bottle and throw everyone out. But experience had taught me something important. Staying calm gives you more power than losing control. So instead of making a scene, I walked quietly through the crowd and headed straight toward my father. "Dad," I whispered gently. He jumped in surprise, nearly dropping his plate. Then relief appeared on his face, followed quickly by embarrassment. He even tried hiding the plate behind his back. "Georgia," he said softly, "I didn't know you were coming today." "I didn't know there was a party," I replied. "Why are you standing here eating alone?" He looked down at his worn work boots against the polished floor. "Oh, it's okay," he said with a weak smile. "Vanessa needed the table for gifts. The seats are taken. I don't mind standing." His voice broke my heart. I looked toward my mother sitting quietly in the corner. "And Mom?" I asked. "Why is she over there by herself?" Dad hesitated before answering. Vanessa said the younger guests needed the main area for photos. For photos. Before I could respond, I felt someone tap my shoulder. It was Vanessa. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that hides annoyance. "Georgia," she said, "we didn't think you'd make it." "I came to surprise Mom and Dad," I replied calmly, "since this is their house." Vanessa laughed lightly and waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, we're all family here," she said. "Besides, your parents barely use the living room anyway." I stared directly at her. "Do they prefer staying out of the way?" I asked quietly, "or were they told to?" For a second, her smile disappeared. But she recovered fast. "Let's be realistic," she said in a lower voice. "They're older now. Jason and I are building a future and starting a family. It makes more sense for us to use the space properly." Then she casually mentioned turning my mother's sewing room into a nursery. That was enough. I looked across the room at my brother. He avoided my eyes completely because he knew exactly what was happening. Vanessa believed she had already won. She thought my parents were too kind to fight back. But she forgot one very important detail. The house wasn't hers. I slowly reached into my bag and touched the official property deed I had brought with me that day. And suddenly, I realized that piece of paper wasn't just proof of ownership anymore. It was about to end the entire party. "Finally, something that actually looks expensive," Vanessa said as she opened the gift box. The room filled with laughter. From the corner of the room, my mother quietly flinched. I recognized that reaction immediately. Just a week earlier, Mom had proudly shown me the baby booties she knitted by hand during a video call. They weren't fancy cashmere. They were simple yellow yarn, made with love and patience. But I already knew what probably happened to them. Vanessa had either thrown them away or hidden them somewhere because they didn't fit her perfect image. I looked over at Jason again. He stood near the punch bowl looking uncomfortable and nervous. Finally, he walked toward me, lowering his voice so Vanessa wouldn't hear. "Georgia, please," he whispered. "Don't start a fight. She's pregnant and stressed." "Stressed?" I snapped quietly, pointing toward Dad. "Look at him, Jason. He's eating alone in the hallway while strangers take over his house." Jason rubbed the back of his neck anxiously. "It just happened slowly," he admitted. "Vanessa said our apartment was too small for all the baby stuff. Then we brought over some boxes. Then she said we should stay here to help Mom and Dad around the house. And after that, she just started changing things." "Changing things?" I repeated. I pointed at the wall where my parents' wedding photo used to hang. Now it had been replaced by a shiny framed quote that read "Boss Babe." "She removed their family pictures, Jason." "She said they didn't match the party decorations," he muttered weakly. "She was going to put them back later." I stared at him in disbelief. "We are family," I said coldly. "But I'm beginning to wonder if you remember which family matters most." Across the room, Vanessa was opening another gift while showing off for her guests. This time it was an expensive baby monitor. "We're putting this in the master bedroom," she announced proudly. "The room is bigger and better for the baby." The master bedroom. My parents' bedroom. That was the moment something inside me completely snapped. Vanessa wasn't simply staying there temporarily. She was taking over the house room by room and slowly pushing my parents out of their own lives. I glanced at Dad again. He was wiping his mouth with a tiny cocktail napkin because he couldn't even find a real one. I checked the time on my watch. The party was at its busiest. Perfect timing. "Jason," I said calmly, stepping away from him. "I'm not about to make a scene." I adjusted my blazer and looked toward Vanessa. "I'm about to fix a problem." Instead of confronting her immediately, I decided to see how bad things really were upstairs. "I need to use the bathroom," I said casually. Jason looked relieved, thinking I had calmed down. "Upstairs," he replied quickly. "The downstairs bathroom is full of gifts." Of course it was. As I passed my father, I gently squeezed his shoulder. "Don't leave, Dad," I whispered softly. "Please stay right here." Then I walked upstairs. The noise from the party faded behind me with every step. But up there, the house felt different. The air smelled like fresh paint and secrets. I opened the guest room door first. My stomach dropped instantly. The room looked like a crowded storage closet. Boxes were stacked everywhere, each labeled in my mother's handwriting. Kitchen items, books, living room decorations. Vanessa hadn't just redecorated the house. She had packed away my parents' lives like old junk. I moved down the hallway toward my mother's sewing room. The room I had designed specially for her. It used to be warm, peaceful, and full of sunlight. Now it looked completely destroyed. The soft cream walls were painted bright baby blue. The custom shelves I paid to install had been ripped out, leaving rough holes in the walls. A baby crib box sat in the middle of the room. And in the corner, shoved carelessly upside down, was my mother's old sewing machine, the one passed down from her grandmother. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my skin. But the worst part was still waiting for me. I opened the master bedroom door. Designer shopping bags covered the bed. Expensive clothes were thrown everywhere. My father's framed family photos had been turned face down on the dresser and replaced with Vanessa's ultrasound pictures and motivational quotes. Then I opened the closet. Most of my mother's clothes had been pushed into a tiny back corner while the rest of the space was filled with Vanessa's outfits, shoes, and coats. At that moment, everything became crystal clear. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't helping family. This was a complete takeover. My parents were being pushed out of their own bedroom while Vanessa slowly claimed the entire house as hers. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer, Alan. He answered quickly. Georgia, everything okay? No, I replied firmly. I need confirmation about the house trust. Alan immediately understood my serious tone. Yes, he said. The trust was finalized 3 weeks ago. You're the trustee, and your parents are the legal beneficiaries. And nobody else has any rights to live here. I asked. Correct, he replied. Anyone else staying there is legally considered a guest. I looked around at Vanessa's clothes spread across my parents' room. And if guests refuse to leave? Alan paused for a second. If they've been there less than 30 days with no lease agreement, refusing to leave becomes trespassing. I took a slow breath. Good, I said quietly, because I'm about to remove some unwanted guests. After hanging up, I took photos of everything, the ruined sewing room, the packed boxes, the crowded closet. Then I walked back downstairs. The party had moved on to cake cutting. Vanessa stood proudly beside a giant 3-tier baby shower cake while everyone gathered around taking pictures. After cake, she announced happily, I'll give everyone a tour of the nursery. The nursery. My mother's sewing room. I walked calmly into the middle of the crowded living room. People moved aside without even realizing it. Then I looked directly at Vanessa. Vanessa, I said clearly. The entire room went silent. Vanessa's smile faded for a second before she forced it back. Georgia, perfect timing, she said tightly. We were just about to cut the cake. I was upstairs, I interrupted calmly, standing directly in front of her. The room instantly went silent. Even the music suddenly felt too loud until someone quietly turned it down. I went looking for the bathroom, I continued, but instead, I got a chance to see all the changes happening upstairs. Vanessa glanced nervously at Jason before looking back at me. Oh, she laughed awkwardly. The nursery isn't finished yet. I'm not talking about the nursery, I said coldly. I'm talking about the master bedroom. Jason swallowed hard. Vanessa straightened her posture and gripped the cake knife tighter. We're only using some extra space, she replied defensively. We're trying to organize things better. Organize? I let out a short laugh with no humor in it. Your clothes are hanging in the closet. Your shoes are lined up on the shelves. Meanwhile, my mother's clothes are shoved into the back corner, and my father's belongings are packed into boxes upstairs. Then I turned toward my parents sitting quietly in the corner. My mother looked terrified. Mom, I asked gently, softening my voice for her. Did you agree to move out of your bedroom? Every person in the room stared at her. Mom looked down nervously before glancing at Vanessa and Jason. She looked scared, not of me, but scared of causing problems. Scared of losing contact with her future grandchild. We only wanted to help, she whispered shakily. Vanessa said the baby needed the downstairs room near the bathroom. I knelt slightly beside her. Mom, I said softly, that bedroom was designed for you and Dad so you wouldn't need to climb stairs anymore. Then I stood and faced Vanessa again. So you moved 2 elderly people upstairs just so you could take their master bedroom? This time Vanessa dropped the fake smile completely. It's temporary, she snapped. You're making a huge deal out of nothing. I'm pregnant. My feet hurt. I need the large bathroom. It's their house, I replied slowly, making sure every word landed clearly. It's family property, Vanessa shot back loudly. Jason is their son. I'm carrying their grandchild. We're the future of this family. We need the room more than they do. The room stayed completely silent. Then she said the one thing that pushed everyone over the edge. What do they even need 4 bedrooms for? It's selfish. Selfish. The word hung in the air like poison. I stared at her in disbelief. My father is standing in the hallway eating cold food, I said quietly. My mother is scared to sit on her own couch. And you're calling them selfish. Vanessa threw her hands into the air dramatically. I'm trying to build a future for my baby, she shouted. Why are you trying to ruin everything? Then she turned toward Jason desperately. Say something. Jason looked miserable. Georgia, he muttered quietly. Can we talk about this later? Not in front of everyone. No, I answered immediately. Because talking later suggests this is something open for discussion. It isn't. Vanessa scoffed loudly and looked around the room for support from her friends. Some of the guests nodded sympathetically at her while glaring at me like I was the villain. She's always been controlling, Vanessa announced dramatically. She's jealous because she doesn't have kids of her own. She thinks because she helped decorate the place, she owns it. Then she crossed her arms and smirked. And let's be honest here, she added. Jason and I are taking over the mortgage payments anyway. We talked to David about it last week. We're helping them financially, so eventually this house will basically become ours. I froze. Slowly, I turned toward my father. Dad, I asked carefully, did they tell you they were taking over the mortgage? Dad looked embarrassed as he nodded slowly. Jason said the mortgage and taxes would be too expensive for us, he admitted quietly. He said if they moved in and paid monthly expenses, it would help everyone. At that moment, everything became clear. This wasn't misunderstanding. It was manipulation. I looked directly at Vanessa. There is no mortgage, I said calmly. Vanessa blinked in confusion. What? There is no mortgage, I repeated louder so the whole room could hear me. I bought this house in cash. $450,000. Fully paid. Gasps spread through the crowd. I also prepaid the taxes and insurance for years, I continued. My parents owe nothing on this house. Then I stepped closer to Vanessa. The only problem in this home is you. Vanessa's face turned bright red as she whipped around toward Jason. You told me there was a mortgage, she snapped at him. Jason looked panicked. I assumed there was one, he stammered weakly. Most people finance homes. I looked at my brother with disappointment. So you tried convincing our parents to hand over control of their house by pretending there was debt. We weren't tricking them. Vanessa shouted. Her calm image was completely gone now. We're family. The house would come to us one day anyway. We just needed help sooner because babies are expensive. I don't care about your lifestyle, I said firmly. I care that you destroyed my mother's sewing room and pushed my parents out of their own bedroom. It's a nursery. Vanessa screamed back. I need a nursery. Then suddenly her confidence returned. She folded her arms and lifted her chin proudly. You can't kick us out anyway, she declared. We live here now. Our things are here. We get mail here. That makes us tenants. She smiled smugly like she had won. But that was exactly the mistake I had been waiting for. I'm glad you mentioned that, I said calmly. I reached into my bag and slowly pulled out the blue folder. The sound of the papers moving was the only noise in the room. While I was upstairs, I continued, I spoke to my lawyer. Vanessa's smile weakened slightly. You see, tenants usually have leases or pay rent, I explained. You've done neither. I opened the folder carefully. Since you've been here less than 30 days, legally you're considered guests. Vanessa's expression changed instantly. "You can't prove that," she argued quickly. I held her stare without blinking. "I have proof," I replied smoothly. "And I also have photos of the damage done upstairs." Then I lifted the official property documents high enough for everyone to see the county seal stamped on the front. "This," I announced clearly, "is the deed to the house." The room stayed completely silent. "And the legal owners are the Martha and David Family Trust." "And do you know who controls that trust?" I asked slowly, staring directly at Vanessa. My voice stayed calm, but every word hit the room like thunder. "I do." Then I slammed the deed papers onto the table beside the baby shower cake. The cake stand shook so hard that a few decorations nearly fell off. "As the legal trustee," I said clearly, "I am officially ending your right to stay in this house." The room went completely silent. It felt like all the air had disappeared at once. Nobody moved. Nobody even reached for their drinks anymore. Vanessa stared down at the documents on the table. For the first time all afternoon, she looked nervous. Truly nervous. But Vanessa was the kind of person who never admitted defeat easily. When she felt cornered, she attacked harder. She suddenly laughed, but the sound was sharp and fake. "Ending our right to stay here," she repeated loudly, looking around at her guests for support. "Did everyone hear that? Georgia thinks she can throw us out like strangers." Then she rolled her eyes dramatically. "Stop being ridiculous," she snapped. "You're ruining the whole mood." "The mood was ruined the moment my parents were treated like servants in their own home," I replied calmly. Then I looked around the room at all the guests. "This party is over," I announced. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but everyone needs to gather their things and leave." A few women immediately grabbed their purses and looked toward the door awkwardly. The excitement of the party had disappeared. Reality had finally entered the room. But Vanessa suddenly rushed in front of the doorway like she could physically stop everyone from leaving. "No one is going anywhere," she shouted. "This is my baby shower." Then she turned toward me, her face twisted with anger. "You've always been jealous of me," she hissed. "You think money makes you important. You buy expensive things for people because you think it earns love." The room stayed frozen as she continued attacking me. "But guess what?" she snapped. "It doesn't work. Jason and I are the real family here. We're giving your parents a grandchild. You're just the person paying the bills." Her words were cruel on purpose. I saw my mother lower her head in pain. I saw Jason cover his face with embarrassment. But strangely, I felt calmer than before. Because Vanessa had finally shown everyone exactly who she really was. "You're right," I said softly. "Maybe I am the one paying for everything." I placed my hand on the deed papers. "And right now, the person paying for everything says you need to leave." Vanessa opened her mouth to argue again, but I continued before she could interrupt. "Since we're talking honestly now," I said, turning slightly toward the guests, "let's discuss what Vanessa was actually planning behind my parents' backs." Jason's head immediately snapped toward me. I slowly pulled out my phone. Earlier, Vanessa told everyone she and Jason planned to take over the mortgage to help my parents. I paused. "But there is no mortgage." Whispers immediately spread around the room. So I started asking myself an important question. I continued. Why would she need my parents signing paperwork for a debt that doesn't exist? Jason suddenly looked pale. "Georgia," he whispered nervously. I ignored him. "Jason," I asked carefully, "did you know Vanessa recently tried opening a line of credit using this house as collateral?" Jason looked completely shocked. "What?" he said, turning toward his wife. "No, you told me those papers were for utilities and insurance." "She lied," I said firmly. Then I looked directly at Vanessa. "You were trying to use my parents' fully paid house to borrow money." The room exploded into whispers again. "She wanted my elderly parents to sign financial documents so she could access the value of this property," I continued. "Not to help them, to fund her own lifestyle." Vanessa's face turned ghost white. "That's not true," she yelled desperately. "You're making this up." Without saying a word, I held up my phone. My lawyer checked public records while I was upstairs, I explained. The application inquiry is right here. I read directly from the screen. Applicant, Vanessa Miller. Proposed co-signers, David and Martha Miller. Jason looked physically sick. And the property listed as security. I continued. This house. Vanessa suddenly lunged toward my phone, trying to grab it from my hand, but I stepped back immediately. It's fraud, Vanessa, I said coldly. And because I control the trust, you needed my parents to sign around me. Now the guests weren't confused anymore. They were horrified. Trying to pressure elderly family members into debt crossed a line even they couldn't defend. Vanessa looked around the room desperately, searching for someone to support her. Nobody did. Then she grabbed Jason's arm tightly. Say something, she screamed. She's humiliating me. Jason looked at her. Then at me. Then at our father standing quietly near the hallway with his paper plate still in his hand. For the first time all day, my brother finally looked ashamed. Slowly, he pulled his arm away from Vanessa. You lied to me, he whispered. Vanessa's eyes widened. I did it for us, she shouted. For our future. For our baby. Then her voice cracked completely. Who cares how we got the money? Your parents don't even need this huge house. Get out. The voice came from across the room. Everyone turned at once. My mother had stood up. No more shrinking into the corner. No more silence. She stood tall despite her shaking hands. But this time the shaking wasn't fear. It was anger. Slowly, she walked to the table and picked up the framed Boss Babe sign Vanessa had placed where my parents' wedding photo used to be. Then she dropped it straight into the trash can. The sound echoed through the quiet room. Mom, Vanessa whispered weakly. Please. Think about the baby. My mother looked directly at her. Do not use that child as a weapon, she said firmly. Her voice shook with emotion, but every word was strong. Your father and I raised 2 children while living in a tiny apartment and working day and night. We struggled honestly. We never lied to people. We never stole from family. Then she pointed toward the front door. This house was a gift from Georgia, she continued. And instead of showing gratitude, you disrespected her, disrespected my husband, and disrespected me. The room stayed silent. You are no longer welcome here. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. But where are we supposed to go? She cried. We gave up our apartment. You have parents, my father finally said as he stepped beside my mother and wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Call them. His voice was calm, but firm. Because you are not staying here another night. One by one, the party guests quietly rushed out the door. Some even left their gifts behind because they wanted to escape the awkward situation as fast as possible. Vanessa looked around wildly at the emptying room, realizing nobody was on her side anymore. Then she looked at Jason. But he couldn't even meet her eyes. Finally, she looked at me. I didn't move. I didn't argue. I simply stood there holding the deed papers while she realized she had lost everything. With a scream of frustration, Vanessa grabbed her purse and stormed out the front door so hard the windows shook. And suddenly, the house became quiet again. But this time, it wasn't the tense silence from before. It felt peaceful. Like a storm had finally passed. The next few hours were exhausting, but healing at the same time. I didn't allow Jason to leave immediately. You're helping clean this mess up, I told him firmly. Every decoration. Every box. Every single thing she brought into this house. Jason didn't argue. He moved silently through the rooms, looking broken and ashamed. For hours, he packed Vanessa's clothes into bags and carried boxes down to the garage. He stripped the master bedroom of every sign she had been there. I watched him quietly. His shoulders looked heavy, weighed down by guilt and regret. Meanwhile, I called a locksmith. By evening, every lock in the house had been changed. Then I went upstairs into my mother's sewing room. I took apart the crib box myself. I carefully lifted her old sewing machine back into place and cleaned the dust from it. I unpacked my father's books and returned them to the shelves near his favorite chair. Little by little, the house started feeling warm again. By sunset, the balloons were gone. The fake decorations were in trash bags. Fresh air flowed through the open windows instead of the overwhelming smell of perfume and party food. The house finally felt like home again. Near the front door, Jason stood quietly holding the last box of his belongings. Across the room, Mom and Dad sat together on their couch, drinking tea peacefully for the first time all day. "I'm sorry," Jason said finally, his voice breaking. "I swear I didn't know anything about the loan. I kept trying to make her happy. I thought if I gave her everything she wanted, maybe she'd stop being angry all the time." Mom slowly stood up and walked toward him. She wrapped her arms around him, but it wasn't the warm, comforting hug of celebration. It was the hug of a mother who still loved her son deeply, even while feeling hurt and disappointed by the choices he had made. "Jason," she said softly, "love is not about sacrificing everyone else just to keep one person satisfied." He lowered his head while tears rolled down his face. "You lost yourself trying to please someone who was never satisfied," Mom continued gently. "You have a lot to think about now, about yourself, your future, and your marriage." Jason nodded slowly. "I'm staying at a motel tonight," he admitted quietly. "Vanessa went to her mother's house. I think I need some time alone." Then he looked at me. "Thank you, Georgia," he said, "for stopping this. I don't think I could have done it myself." "You could have," I replied firmly. "You just chose not to." He looked down in shame. "Next time," I added, "don't wait for someone else to protect the people you should have protected yourself." Jason nodded again, unable to argue. Then he picked up the last box and walked slowly out the front door into the evening darkness. I locked the new deadbolt behind him. The click of that lock sounded peaceful. Final. Safe. For the first time in weeks, the house truly belonged to my parents again. When I turned around, Dad was already sitting comfortably in his recliner with his feet up like he finally felt allowed to relax again. Mom smiled and patted the soft velvet chair beside her. "Come sit down, Georgia," she said warmly. I sat beside them, and for a long while, none of us spoke. We simply sat together in silence, enjoying the calm after the chaos. The house finally felt warm again. Like home. After a while, Dad looked down at his rough hands and sighed heavily. "I'm sorry we didn't tell you sooner," he admitted quietly. "We didn't want to worry you. And we didn't want problems between you and your brother." I reached over and held his worn, calloused hand tightly. "Dad," I said gently, "none of this was your fault. You and Mom were trying to keep peace. They were the ones who took advantage of your kindness." Then I looked at both of them seriously. "But promise me something," I said. "Promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel unwelcome in your own home again. Not strangers. Not relatives. Nobody." Dad squeezed my hand and nodded. "I promise." A small smile appeared on Mom's face, and for the first time that day, I saw a spark of humor return to her eyes. "And Georgia," she said carefully, "can we repaint the sewing room? That awful blue color gives me a headache." I burst into laughter. Real laughter this time. The kind that releases all the stress trapped inside your chest. "Yes, Mom," I said, still laughing. "We'll repaint it tomorrow. Any color you want." 3 months later, the house finally looked the way it was always meant to look. The soft sage green walls were back. The garden outside had started blooming beautifully. The sewing room was peaceful and bright again, filled with fabric, sunlight, and the steady sound of Mom's sewing machine. As for Vanessa, things fell apart quickly after that night. Trying to pressure elderly people into signing financial papers was a serious mistake. Once her own parents learned the truth about what she had done, they took her in, but not happily. She ended up living in their basement, far away from the luxury lifestyle she desperately tried to create. Jason filed for divorce only 2 weeks after the baby shower disaster. Later, we discovered the fake mortgage story wasn't the only lie Vanessa had been hiding. There were more debts, more secret credit cards, and more financial problems than anyone realized. Jason started therapy soon afterward. He moved into a tiny studio apartment and slowly began rebuilding his relationship with our family one step at a time. Every Sunday, He now comes over to help Dad with the yard work. Not because anyone forces him to, but because he genuinely wants to make things right. Yesterday, I stopped by the house again. When I walked inside, sunlight poured through the sewing room windows while Mom happily worked on a quilt. Dad was asleep in his recliner with a mystery novel resting on his chest. And for the first time in a long time, they looked completely peaceful. Not nervous. Not uncomfortable. Not pushed aside. They looked like what they truly were. The owners of their own home. As I stood there watching them, I realized every dollar I spent, every difficult conversation, and every painful moment from that day had been worth it. I may have bought the house with money, but I protected their home with truth, love, and courage. And that was the kind of investment that would last forever.